Díomh a gcuinniú agus tá anna fáilte roimh go léir chuig garatha náisiúnta na Lus. You're all very welcome to the National Botanic Gardens, one of the gems on Dublin's north side, to this event for One Dublin One Book. My name is Anne-Marie Kelly and I'm the Director of Dublin UNESCO City of Literature. And this event is one of many being held in April to celebrate One Dublin One Book, a Dublin City Council initiative supported by the Department of Tourism, Culture, Arts, Gaeltacht, Sports and Media. The book in question is, of course, The Coroner's Daughter by Andrew Hughes. It's a historical thriller and page-turner set in the early part of the 19th century in Dublin. And we have a wonderful event in store for you today in such a beautiful setting. And I'd like to thank Matthew Jebb, the Director of the National Botanic Gardens, and his team, Felicity, for hosting this event today. I'd like to also say a special thanks to Julianne Mooney, to Dave Knox and Jackie Lynham, who are working behind the scenes to make the programme a success. Now, if any of you are reading The Coroner's Daughter at the moment, you'll know that the story is set in an unusual summer where the sun doesn't shine. Now, most of you will think that that's not unusual, but this was a freakish event where there was a permanent fog over the city which the sun couldn't penetrate. And to discuss bizarre weather phenomena, we've invited Joanna Donnelly along, meteorologist with Met Éireann and forecaster on RTE. Joanna has written her own book on weather for children, the Great Irish Weather Book. It's beautifully illustrated by Fuchsia Macquarie. Also joining us today is another scientist turned poet, Jane Robinson, whose main area focuses on ecology and nature, and her poetry collection, Journey to the Sleeping Whale, is published by Salmon Press and received the Shine Story Award for Best Debut Poetry Collection in 2019. Her recent collection is The Island and the Atoll, and she has some of her books with her today if you're interested in getting some of them. And finally, joining these bright sparks is our author, archivist and writer, Andrew Hughes, the author of The Coroner's Daughter. And The Coroner's Daughter is Andrew's most recent published book. His first book was a non-fiction one, Lives Less Ordinary, Dublin's Fitzwilliam Square, 1798 to 1922. And the research for this book was the springboard for Andrew's second book, The Convictions of John Delahunt. Now, The Coroner's Daughter can be borrowed in all formats, print and online via BorrowBox app from your local library, and it definitely would make an acceptable present. In fact, to Bray bookstore outside, and Andrew will do some signings afterwards. So now let us put our hands together and give the panel a warm welcome.
Thanks to everybody for coming, and this is a wonderful venue. So I think Andrew's going to start by reading us a passage.
Absolutely. Thank you all for being here. Thanks, Anne-Marie, for that lovely welcome. The passage I'm going to read is early on in the book. The year that the book is set is 1816, which is known as the year without a summer, and my main character, Abigail Lawless, is practicing some amateur meteorology. To do that, she has certain devices placed on the windowsill outside one of the rooms of her house. And so here we're just going to see her taking some measurements with Jimmy, who is the son of the housekeeper in their house. Jimmy picked his way between the clutter to open a small sash window. Outside there was a ledge, sheltered by eaves and gutters extending from the roof overhead. 3 devices sat on the sill, exposed to the late morning air. Jimmy leaned forward to examine the first, a Swedish thermometer, the temperature marked in centigrade after Anders Celsius. It had been a gift from my father on my 15th birthday, and though I loved the scrolled redwood surround, the slender glass tube and vein of quicksilver, I thought the Fahrenheit scale better suited to the Irish climate, for how could one consider a day's temperature to be less than 0? A breeze made Jimmy's eyes water, and he blinked once. "What does it say?" I said. 16, he said. The highest we'd seen it since we began taking measurements in the spring. The sun's warmth had finally penetrated, and for the first time this summer, hearths remained cold and winter cloaks were set aside. The barometer was Jimmy's favourite device, since he'd made it himself. An empty glass jar sealed with a thin piece of pig's bladder stretched over the top. When air pressure was high, the membrane had a depression in the centre, and when low, it ballooned upwards. He bent low so his eye was level with the top of the jar. "What do you think?" I said. "Flat as a flounder," he said. Church bells chimed over the city, and I said we had to hurry. The third instrument was a brass frame in which a small weight hung suspended from a single strand of my own hair. When we first set it up, I'd spent a finicky afternoon tying one end to the frame and the other to the weight. Several had snapped before I got it right. Human hair was considered the best fibre for the task, expanding in the presence of moisture and contracting when dry. And since my hair was completely unmanageable in muggy weather, I told Jimmy we had the most sensitive instrument in the city. As the weight rose and fell, it caused a long needle to oscillate within a half-moon scale. On the day we set it up, a fog rolled in over Dublin. The weight descended and the pointer crept upwards, and I told Jimmy to imagine how slight the droplets must be, that they could permeate the filament. He had found it pleasing, that something so imperceptible could still be detected. Jimmy peered at the scale and said the humidity today was 42%, declaring that to be relatively dry. He opened a notebook on the sill. Each page was filled with lists of measurements arranged by date, tracking not only changes in weather, but the progression of Jimmy's handwriting. 16 and 42, I said, the year that Galileo died. Down below, my father and Ewan emerged from their workrooms. Father was speaking with expansive gestures, probably expounding on some medical phenomenon, and Ewan walked beside him with his head bent and hands held behind his back. They paused next to a wall where coils of sweet pea were just beginning to flower. In the sunlight, Ewan's hair appeared more blonde than auburn. He swept a forelock over his left ear with his thumb, a habit that I had begun to notice. Jimmy was saying my name. I said. I said, should I close the window? No, I'll do it. You go and get ready. He nodded and hurried from the room. While reaching up, a breeze ruffled the lace on my cuff, and I noticed that the temperature outside had dipped by a degree. The membrane atop the barometer swelled upwards. I gazed at the horizon, over the terraced rooftops, but all I could see was a hazy blue.
So perhaps everyone in the audience knows that the protagonist is a woman, Abigail, a young woman, and so she probably had quite long hair.
Yes, something that I had to imagine, a feast of...
And are you familiar with these sort of instruments?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Reading passages like that, I love historical fiction anyway, and because there's always an opportunity to learn about something, and I know something about the evolution of the instruments over time, and it's kind of disappointing now when I go into schools. Our instruments are more sensors than actual physical movement of mercury, quicksilver, of course. A little anecdote here. Remember, because I'm a scientist first, a weather forecaster second, probably. And in science in school, my friend told me nobody would ever be my science partner in school. And I said, I didn't notice, because I didn't care. I didn't want anybody to be my partner. But I remember in a science class one day, coming across my classmates on their hands and knees on the ground, playing with mercury, because it splits, of course, when you. And I said, stop. Why? Look, it's funny. And they're laughing. I say, do you not listen in class? This is poisonous. And they're like, no. But when I read things like this in books, not only is this girl learning science, she's doing it right. And Andrew did it right as well, because when she opens the window is sheltered and the instruments aren't exposed to the weather, so they're measuring the weather correctly, because of course we don't want the sun shining on our instruments and everything like that. So it was like, yay! I really enjoyed it. It was great.
Yeah, it was a nice way, like this year without a summer was just this nice kind of background for the story in general, but it was also just a nice way to show Abigail as this budding scientist and meteorologist, and just showing her using the correct techniques as far as possible. Like, there would always be variables that she wouldn't have been able to deal with. But yes, it helped just to show her character.
Yeah, great. Great character.
Thank you.
And the year without a summer is really the setting for this book, and we encounter the weather as a character. So all these markers I've put in Andrew's book are where the weather features, and it's kind of a detective story in itself. And I don't know if I should reveal which year it is, but Andrew has his protagonist Abigail come up with a theory that the bad weather is due to a volcanic eruption. So I wonder, would you like to speak about that a bit more?
Yes, so this year without a summer in 1816 was caused, it is generally believed, by the eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia in 1815. That wasn't known at the time. It's something that I had Abigail just intuitively discover, just so I could tell that story in the book itself, and just to show again Abigail as an intuitive detective type of character. So this volcano, it is one of the largest, and perhaps the largest in recorded history at least, and just caused this huge dust cloud to be ejected into the atmosphere, and it settled over Western Europe and North America, just deflected the rays of the sun, brought frost to mid-July, it made sunspots on the sun visible to the naked eye, and it caused great hardship because crops failed in 1816, and there were riots over food in Europe, and new settlers in America faced great hardship. But for me, it just kind of created this lovely, eerie, Gothic atmosphere for crime fiction. So it was really, I'm not sure where I came across this when I first read about Mount Tambora and this eruption. But it was the reason that I chose to set the book in 1816. So really it was my way into the book. And there's a first line at the moment that wasn't the first line at the time. When I first sat down to write the book, I began by describing this weather. And it was a kind of a play on the line by Orwell where he said it was a bright, cold day in April and the clocks had just struck 13. My first line was, it was a hazy afternoon in early July and the frost had just begun to thaw. So that was my way into the book. But then I read Elmore Leonard's first 10 rules of writing. The very first one is, don't begin with the weather. So I said, all right, back to the drawing board. Anyway, so...
Right. So guess how he begins it. For my 18th birthday, father promised me the hand of a handsome young man, which he duly delivered mounted in a glass bell jar. So we get a whole gloomy atmosphere from that.
Yes, a much more effective way in. But I suppose it was just that this weather was obviously, when I first sat down to write the book, the weather was my way into this particular time period. So it all kind of stemmed from there.
And you mentioned in our earlier discussion that Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein that year, 1816. And I wondered if Mary Shelley herself was kind of a model for your Abigail character a little.
Perhaps, maybe subconsciously, but not. It wasn't something I was considering. But yeah, so the Shelley and Byron and would it be Keats possibly, were sheltering in some villa by Lake Geneva in 1816 during this inclement weather. And because they were stuck indoors, they had kind of just gave each other this bet to come up with a character or write a story overnight. And Shelley wrote down and came up with Frankenstein. So it's just odd that this weather should have, led to the creation of this iconic character as well. It's part of how an event like that impacts all walk of life without us quite realizing. Because we mentioned as well, Turner's art might have been very much inspired, this play of light on this strange cloud that obscured the sun. There was all sorts of inventions that came out of it because the roads become so muddy. Somebody kind of drew the blueprints for a first motor vehicle, kind of a frame with wheels and so on. There was methods for improving crops because the crops had failed. So just an event like that is, the mother of invention.
Yeah. Necessity, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent.
And so you had, did you have something to say?
Yeah, no, because when we first started discussing the year without the summer and the eruption, my mind and my husband's mind when we discussed it went to Krakatoa, but I was like, no, Krakatoa's
1873, I think.
83, was it?
70.
What? Okay.
Well, I could be wrong.
I wrote it down, but I forgot it now. But anyway, I knew it was much later because it was much closer to our conscious, that we were, it was a memorable event, not by me personally, but, And of course, I remember Pinatubo, which was in 1991, and they all had the same consequence. They all reduced the temperature of the Earth, of the globe, by a half a degree or somewhere around the half a degree. We talk now when we're discussing climate change about temperature changes of a degree, and that doesn't sound like an awful lot, or 2 degrees, and that doesn't sound like an awful lot, but it's a huge amount because we measure the temperature over the whole of the globe, measured day and night, and half a degree is a huge difference. And I recall when Pinatubo erupted, and the idea that that was going to solve the problem of climate change and that nature would react to human behaviour to fix the mess we've made. And of course, nature isn't a sentient being, it doesn't fix things. And these eruptions that do reduce the temperature because of what they do, sending ash and dust into the atmosphere, they're all only very temporary and passing. So I don't know I think the eruption was in August of the previous year.
Okay.
So that was actually a very long-term result.
Yeah.
That the summer was affected the following year. So I would suspect that there was other aspects in play, that was a major part of it, but there was other things in play that caused the disruption of this natural cycle. When Krakatoa erupted and the same consequence, the reduction in the temperature, they blamed the following couple of cold years on that. But in actual fact, the year before Krakatoa had erupted, it had also been really, really cold. So it may have exacerbated the cooling, but it wasn't the full responsibility.
Yeah, that's probably true. The 1810s were noted as being a cold decade.
We might have been in a cold cycle, but that's normal. You know, we are normally in cold, cool. Anybody that's experienced April out there, or April, I should say, will know that there are cooling periods. But what we would try and emphasise to anybody that has an ear and will listen, that those aren't fixes.
Yeah. It's. It was strange though looking back at this event. So it was like a volcanic winter, and it was a cooling event. Whereas now the trouble is global warming.
Yeah.
But just the same kind of way of talking about it was going on in the 1810s. The same concern, the same attempts at explanations, and often those explanations would be completely wrong. But there was just something that people felt that they had to explain, and it was part of the setting of the book as well. Was that there are two kind of rival groups in the city. There's the Brethren, this evangelical group, part of an evangelical awakening in the first few decades of the 19th century that was called the Second Reformation in Ireland. And then there was these students of the Enlightenment who were looking at this weather event going, there must be a logical explanation for this. This can't be the will of God or the wrath of God. But just the attempts at explanation in 1816 some kind of mirrored some of the language that we see today in climate, I wouldn't say debate, climate concerns.
Excellent. Well done, Andrew.
Yeah, you referred to a man in Cove who had written and this was this an actual
Yes.
letter in the archive?
So I was looking at journals of the time, meteorological journals or just scientific journals in general, with these attempts to explain what was going on, and this particular one cropped up.
And so a retired admiral from Cove said that for years the polar seas had been melting, with ice flows observed far to the south, so that a search for the northwest passage was likely to begin again. He said the thaw had led to exhalations of vapour which had deflected the heat of the sun. Is that that sounds very prophetic.
Well, one of our concerns, or the concerns with relating to global climate change, is that the melting ice caps release the vapours. The caps as they are at the moment, the permafrost holds greenhouse gases within the permafrost, and as it melts, those greenhouse gases are released, and then there's a cycle and a chain event following from that. So it's a consequence causes the problem, causes the consequence of the problem, causes the problem. So we don't know how far we can expect that to be okay before it's catastrophic.
Yeah.
That was just that admiral who come up with that theory. It was a wrong theory for the time, but it just seems strangely prophetic of what would cause climate change in the future. So he wrote that theory, and it was probably just dismissed as a kind of a crackpot idea.
It might not have been entirely wrong.
It might have been, again,
it might have been part of this whole, because obviously the haze and the dust and the cooling was caused by Mount Tambora, but the excessively cold
factors,
might have been caused by a previous weather cycle. That those two things happening together caused the year without a summer. It wasn't necessarily one thing or the other. The haze and the dust definitely, forget I said definitely, most likely by the eruptions, but we shouldn't dismiss this guy at all. He was
absolutely,
he was right. He was in the right court anyway.
Yeah, and so it's strange when I was looking back and researching these events, just to find language like that. It just shows again that these ideas are always there. Kind of history is cyclical in a way, and certain things crop up again. Like an idea that he had was beside a contribution from another man who said the proliferation of lightning rods has caused storms to develop just because the lightning rods are there. So these kind of crackpot ideas versus, quite prophetic ideas. The lightning rods idea probably got more traction. Probably said, oh yeah, that sounds more likely. But it's just, you were kind of saying earlier, just science is, you guess at the answer first of all, and then try and find evidence to support that and hone it. And
absolutely, hypothesis and the experiments to prove or disprove the hypotheses. This again, it's such a great book, it's great, but the idea that a storm propagating larger storms, an individual thunderstorm can actually create a daughter cell and create another thunderstorm, and that does happen, and from there hurricanes emerge, but they don't generate large-scale systems.
Yeah.
But they do propagate little storms. We don't have that here in Ireland because our temperate climate doesn't allow for it, but take yourself off to the...
So these ideas, I suppose, they all had merit and they were made in good faith, and it was probably at a time when meteorology was just becoming a science, or more scientific rigor was being applied. It was decades before.
It was about 4 decades before we had the start of what we term as now weather forecasting and meteorology, but certainly it didn't pop out of nowhere. Seeds were planted and they grew.
Yeah, these little devices, for instance, might have been 18th century inventions, but... Yeah.
You were saying, I can't remember when Boyle was born, but Boyle's laws are also the foundation of what we do in study, so the can't remember it now. Rho is equal to RV, pressure is equal to whatever, doesn't matter.
Ask me.
Don't ask me either. I know it when I'm not looking at people. But those were a couple of centuries before, and they build, we stand on the shoulders of giants, and we continue that way through science and through everything else that we do.
Yeah. It's nice then, to have somebody like Abigail, just a little snapshot. It's kind of amateurish, but it's well-intentioned, and it led to better results, more refined results.
She's a very precocious protagonist altogether. It's something really interesting I found in this novel as well was the effect of this bad summer. I mean, people were hungry. I think there was even a small famine that year, and so there was a lot of social unrest naturally and hardship. So I think that's something you can explore in fiction.
Yeah. It's something that I'm conscious of in general, writing historical fiction and reading it a lot, is that the stories that are told tend to be from the more privileged strata of the societies, mostly because those are the people who wrote their stories down, and they're the stories that we can now find in archives, and because of that, it's much easier to get inspiration for characters and tell those particular stories. But so, I'm always conscious that Abigail was in a very privileged position in certain ways, not because of her gender, obviously, but in other ways she was much more privileged than most of the people living in Dublin and Ireland at the time. So I was trying to find ways to show that hardship was there in this society, and a lot to do. Well, there was also, coming out of the European wars and so forth, there's lots of causes for hardship in various ways. But it's important, I suppose, just to kind of create an authentic world and a rich world. It's important to show that side of the city as well.
And, you know, that would be a consequence of these drastic weather events, I believe.
Yeah. Like it's just this idea as well with facing into climate change, how fragile our system is, and like an event like this, possibly exacerbated by other events, can cause such a disruption that our whole society teeters. And now where we are much more dependent on skills that most of us don't have, and if society was to waver, we'd be in real trouble, and it's something that we're facing.
And what's interesting, you did talk about there was a soup kitchen. These people were hungry right in front of the better off classes, as you discussed. But another consequence of the disparity of the poor people that were hungry and the privileged people, that gap in society, of course, leads to unrest and the rise of these far right, the zealots. And as you say, it mirrors what we're seeing at the moment, and that gap that develops through hardship that can be caused by the breakdown of crops, people that rely on the weather to their livelihood directly. I mean, we all think that we're, directly influenced by the weather, but in fact we can put on a coat, we can stay indoors, we can use the tumble dryer. I don't use the tumble dryer, but we could if we really wanted to. But there are actually people that are so vulnerable to the changes of weather that it means the difference between having food and not, or the mass migration of people away from places where they used to be able to grow food. And it is that mass migration of people into areas where they're not necessarily welcome. They have a different culture, a different religion, and then there's unrest, and then there's the consequence of climate change is more than whether the house in Wexford is going to lose its beachfront.
Yeah.
The consequences of global climate change. We changed the wording a few years ago. You might remember we used to talk about climate change. No, we used to talk about global warming. And the problem with the phrase of global warming was that most of the population of the world, the largest majority, lives in the northern hemisphere at a point on the latitudes that's kind of comfortable. We've chosen as people to live in around these latitudes because it's not too hot, so we can work and we can grow food and we can be comfortable. But we all like to go to Spain every now and again in the summertime and sit by a pool. So we have the feeling that, wouldn't it be nice if it was a degree or two warmer?
Yeah.
We don't think about what the consequences of that is. So I think we had a perception from the world we're okay with global warming. And they also didn't understand, if this is global warming, why is it cold? So we had to try, okay, well, let's use the proper term, which is climate change. But because I talk to school children a lot as part of my job, I've made it part of my job to go out and talk to school kids and to talk to people in general. We have to add back in the global, because it's global climate change. Because here in Ireland and in a lot of the parts of the world where a lot of rich people live, climate change isn't really going to bother them all that much for a long time. But happily, our kids are much more globally aware. Our kids are much more connected with the globe and are actually quite put out at the idea of large areas of the world dying, and don't really think that it's okay that all of those people that have a different colour skin to us are just going to die. So we add back in the global word into the global climate change and talk about how it's going to affect everybody, and us, and not in the future. Now.
I think I think it's interesting as well. Like that all kind of comes down to language in a way, and using the precise terms or terms that will register with people. And it struck me in general how science uses language in a kind of an interesting way that kind of mirrors how writers use language, really trying to be as precise as possible, to kind of strip away, extraneous words and really get to the heart of the matter. It's something I noticed in your poetry as well. Perhaps you've been influenced by just the scientific terms for, especially like the taxonomy of biology. They're kind of beautiful sounds in themselves.
Yeah, and I think you're perfectly right in saying that accuracy is really important. I feel accuracy is really important in literature as well. And so it's interesting, it's interesting to hear about your researches for this book from the archives. And I would say that my poetry stems from, I studied biology before turning to literature. So, and from a concern over environmental loss, basically. And so, but to return to the question of climate and weather, one theory put forward is that the Gulf Stream might peter out and stop, and so suddenly Ireland would be thrown into a much colder climate because we're warmed by this Gulf Stream. So again, this the picture of the year without a summer might be something that would actually happen. Would that be possible, Joanna? Or
certainly the movements of the oceans. That we're warmed by the Gulf Stream, and it's called the Gulf Stream because the stream originates at the Gulf of Mexico, and it comes out. It doesn't only come to Ireland. It's not, it's not just for us, but the movements of the warm oceans. You can look them up online. There are certain patterns, and they vary over time with El Niño and El Niño, which we learned about in the last 10, 15 years. We kind of got, there's this thing called El Niño, and then it came into the public conscience, and that varies. The constants of the Gulf Stream, which keeps our climate temperate, Goldilocks climate. I tell the children when I talk to them that our climate is perfect. Ours is the best in the world because it's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's not too wet, it's not too dry. It's just right, just like Goldilocks said. And they look at us and they think,
It must be better than this.
But it's true. I say when I look out the window and I'm at the schools, what colour is the grass? In spring, it's green. In summer, it's green. In the winter, it's green. And in autumn, it's green. Here in Ireland, that's not the case in other parts of the world. Our climate really is perfect, and it feeds us. And we are so taking it for granted, how perfect and how easy it is to grow food here. And can we see one? Is there a palm tree out there? I can't see one.
In the greenhouse.
But there's one there. You see them all over Dublin. And the first time my father-in-law came to Ireland, he said, "What madness is this? There's palm trees everywhere." I say, yes, there are palm trees. Palm trees grow in Ireland because of the Gulf Stream. The possibility of that cutting off, it's not a tap. It won't cut off overnight. But what I was talking about earlier on, the melting ice caps and the releasing of the greenhouse gases from those, there could well be a tipping point that we as scientists haven't, because we feed this into computer models and it kicks out information. We need to get just another little step forward. But if we do reach a tipping point, we don't know if there's one hypothesis that we might not be able to prove until it's too late, that the introduction of the ices, the caps, are freshwater. Mm-hmm. And of course, you know that fresh water has a different density to salt water. So they don't mix, they act like, the little bubbles in a lava lamp. Mm-hmm. They move off each other, they bump and they move up and down. So if we get a large dump of fresh cold water into our warm oceans, where does it go? And where does our Gulf Stream go? And in that case, you're very right, Jane. Then it's a tap and it's switched off and we're very cold. Mm-hmm. And we could be very, 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 very cold.
We're very cold, and the whole food system of all the animals in the ocean is disrupted.
Everything is. Yeah. That's probably one of those those
we
movies.
To try not to get to that
game changer movies.
Yes.
So can I ask you a bit about the writing of the book, Andrew? I was reading it, and as I say, I was kind of reading it on another level as well, detecting the weather. And it occurred to me that to ask whether you paid attention to the weather outside on the day when you were writing and were reminded to light a fire off for your...
I think it's something that is part of my personality, and I know this is not the case for anyone or for everyone, but I love foul weather. I know I'm very privileged. I know some people it affects their mood. I know some people they have to work out in the weather, which is obviously very bad. I know as a freelancer, I don't have to commute during bad weather. I can look out the curtains and go, no, that's not for me today. So I feel cozy during bad weather, and I think it helps writing. When it's kind of foul and stormy and blowing outside and it's dark and everything else becomes quiet, it really helps the concentration. So it's something that I've always enjoyed. Felt like the Beast from the East recently. I said, oh, that was great. Get in supplies. It was a kind of, it struck me as slightly the first few weeks of lockdown when we didn't realize how long it was going to be. There was this kind of sense where, well, maybe it's not so bad to take a pause and for everybody to experience the same thing and be inside for a while. So I have that sense of enjoying the weather in that sense, and it's something that's come through. It's also something that, I mean, the weather as a feature of writing is something that itself has these kind of trends. The 19th century was the time when using weather as metaphor, reached its absolute peak, especially during the Romantic period. And I was conscious that this book is set in that time, so it was kind of influenced by that, like Shelley by Lake Geneva writing Frankenstein. And so that then became very, passé, and it became kind of mocked as, again, Elmore Leonard's advice, don't start with the weather. It just became it was mocked that weather was it was used as almost this pathetic fallacy of using weather as a character. So in the 20th century, that fell away, and there was much fewer novels where weather played such a huge role in the story. But it's coming back because of climate change. Now again, the weather is part of our consciousness, and it's being used as a device, mostly as a kind of a warning for the future.
And perhaps in poetry, it's a more constant presence. I mean, it's a sort of way of building atmosphere, as you've used it in your novel. So I just have an interesting little quotation from Yeats, from an essay he wrote in 1901. So he said, "I had a conviction, which indeed I have still, that one's verses should hold, as in a mirror, the colours of one's own climate and scenery in their right proportion. And when I found my verses too full of the reds and yellows Shelley gathered in Italy, I thought for 2 days of setting things right, not as I should now, by making my rhythms faint and nervous and filling my images with a certain coldness, a certain wintry wildness, but by eating little and sleeping upon a board." So I think Yeats succeeded in bringing the Irish, the local weather into his poetry, and possibly, that's one of the reasons he was so successful in some ways, is to make works that are really local, and I think that's...
Yeah. And it's just part that the weather is just this shared experience that we all have. So it is just, when you see it in a poem or whatever it happens to be, it's just this kind of visceral, tactile sensation that we get of feeling the cold or the heat, or we know what frost looks like on a lawn or something like that. So it's just something that we can all tap into, and as a device, a literary device, it's just something that's always there.
And different people have different preferences, so it's really interesting to hear that you like the cold.
Yeah.
I deliberately selected that year.
I don't go to the south of Spain and lie on a beach. That's not for me.
No, me neither, Andrew.
Yeah.
I used to be, I know I've come to terms with being a blonde now because I've faded, but I'm a natural redhead. I was a natural redhead, but with my Irish skin, this is obviously fake. And it's like, the idea of liking sunshine is so bizarre to me. It's just like, you're mad. I have a preference for thunderstorms. And I've actually got a tattoo of a thunderstorm on my body, because they're the most powerful thing on the earth. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, it depends on your perspective, we don't get so many here in Ireland because we don't have that heat. And that brings me to what the initial pages of your book, or in the early chapters, he said there was a mist and then there was a hailstorm, and I was like, and I remember, no, this is messed up weather, so this is okay, because when weather is wrong in a book for me, I'm like, no. X. And I do a lot of readings, so I was like, I'm going to write to this guy and tell him. No, but of course, the weather was wrong in this summer, so, but I've seen more thunderstorms in an afternoon on the continent than I've in my lifetime here in Ireland. So, but it's still...
Yeah, it is something when you go abroad, you can
enjoy it.
like
And we get a lot of people saying to me, you know, when I'm on my holidays in America, they can predict when it's going to rain to the hour. I'm like, yeah, but here in Ireland it's harder.
It's a lot more shifting.
Yeah.
But that's it, like we had an event a week or two ago in the Royal Irish Academy with the state pathologists who were looking at the forensics of the book. So they were saying something similar, how just for them enjoying fiction, whether it's TV or books, always just on the lookout for things that are wrong. And just, you know, me as writing the novel and researching, I never thought I'd have to sit beside a meteorologist and, you know, hope that I got everything right. Or the state pathologists. I mean, that's tough grading of the homework.
Well, we have to remember that this is literature, fiction, and it certainly stimulated lots of conversations, which is great.
Yeah, it was great.
So, should I invite questions from the audience?
I just wanted to say something in gratitude, in a way. Something I loved about the book is how lightly all this extensive research is floating in the book. Like, the story is everything. And I just think it's incredibly skillful, because everything subject, the whole One City One Book, I've organised for us to talk with pathologists and meteorologists, and like, it's full and it's all there in the book, and yet the sense of the story is really, really the event. And I just think it's really beautifully, lightly intrinsically woven in. I can't think of the words, but
thank you very much. That's very kind.
Can I follow on from that?
Sure.
Because it looks like just another little novel that you pick up on the side of the easels, but it's, like you say, it's so smart. It's so, and he's an archivist, of course, so there you go. And you go, he knows this stuff. It's so clever, smart, brilliantly, easily read. You know, it is a page turner, you read it easily, but it's so clever. And your use of words, as you said, in the scientific community, and my main role now is a communicator. I'm a scientist, but I've somehow become a communicator because of circumstances. And it's so important to get the words right, like you said, that and you've clearly done that so well. But it looks like just an innocuous book on the side of the thing, you know? It's like, it's just a book. But actually, it's really, 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 really smart. It's a really great book. Well done.
Thank you very much. Thanks for saying that.
Thanks a million for coming here today. I think a great book will lead to great discussions. So please share, just let your friends know and your family know how good the book is. And we're delighted to have had such a great panel as well. Jane, thanks very much for steering the discussion in the right way. And also to Andrew and Joanne. So thanks everybody for coming along. And I think we have an event next Wednesday. Is it the 27th? Thursday 2 weeks, I think, and it's in Ballymun Library, and there's some places left on that, and that's the nearest library to here. So make sure you support your local library, and thanks guys for coming along. Thanks again to the panel.